Hi, Todd Dunn here. Today, I want to start a new series of videos, and this is on an old topic, solar power for RVs. But this one's going to be a little bit different, that I'm going to be spending a little bit more time on some of the details of putting solar power on an RV, and not so much time talking about the sort of grand theory, which is what I did in the last series. And in particular, I'm going to be looking at solar power in smaller RVs like a Class C and more specifically vans. And basically, I want to try and keep these videos short. This one will be a little bit longer because of this introduction. Now, because you probably aren't going to be too excited about looking at my face while I talk, I'm going to turn the camera around and talk over video of Mount Desert Island here in Maine in January of 2018, and also some pictures from Acadia National Park. So let's get going. Okay, let me tell you where we are, and then I'll get going. Right now, I'm on the south side of Southwest Harbor, Maine, looking across the harbor toward the hills of Mount Desert Island, and over there on the left, the body of water is Somme Sound. Okay, the first question that people tend to ask is, how much solar do I need? And that's where I started my last series of videos. How much solar do you need for your RV? Well, what I want to do now is perhaps ask a different question. Do you need solar for your RV? And let's think about that a little bit. Well, whether or not you need solar for your RV depends a lot on how you use your RV. If you move a lot, for example, if when you use your RV, you go someplace, you're there for a day or two, and then you move on, and you drive for more than a couple of hours to the next location, or back home if you're just weekending, you probably don't need solar. Why? Well, because you can use the alternator on your RV's engine, your van or your Class C, to charge your house batteries. And that's very easy to do. So how do you do it? Well, what you need to do is you need to buy what's called an automatic charging relay, or ACR. Automatic charging relays are pretty inexpensive, and they're readily available, and they're pretty easy to wire up. And basically what they do is they connect your RV house batteries to your RV starting battery. But they only connect the two batteries when the engine is running and the alternator is charging the batteries. When you shut down the engine and the charge goes away, the relay opens up and the connection disappears, so that you can use your house batteries without worrying about running your starting battery down and perhaps not being able to start your engine when you're ready to go. And as long as you don't stay in one spot too long and draw your batteries down all the way, an ACR, or automatic charging relay, is probably all you need. You can probably get away without solar. And an ACR is much cheaper to put in than a solar array. Okay, I'm going to move to a new location, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the details of installing an automatic charging relay. And now I'm in Acadia National Park at the Seawall picnic area on the southern end of Mount Desert Island. We're looking out over the Atlantic Ocean. You can See some gulls on the rocks down there, and in the distance, the Duck Islands. And I'll pan around here, show you what's out there. That is the southern end of Great Cranberry Island over there, across the entrance to what's called the Western Way. So what about installing an automatic charging relay? What do you need to do it? Well, basically, you're going to need three things. You're going to need the automatic charging relay itself. You're going to need some wires to connect the automatic charging relay to your starting battery, and then also to connect it to your house batteries on your RV. And finally, to be safe, you really should put a fuse on the positive line. So it's pretty simple. It is a little bit more involved because you need to decide what capacity automatic charging relay do I need. Well, that's pretty easy to decide, really. What you need to do is look at the capacity of your alternator. And if you have a 100 amp alternator, then you should put an automatic charging relay in that has a little bit higher capacity than that, say 120 amp capacity ACR. That's pretty much all there is, except for one other detail, and that is, how long is it going to take you to charge your batteries up while you're driving? Well, that depends on two things. It depends on how much power you use, and it depends on what kind of batteries you have. If you have flooded lead-acid batteries, they won't accept very much charge. When they're charging, you really have to figure that they're not going to accept a charge much over about 20% of their rated capacity. So if you have a 100 amp hour battery, you're not going to be able to charge it at more than 20 amps. So if you used 50 amp hours, that's going to take at least 2.5 and more like 3 hours of driving to recharge the batteries. On the other hand, if you have AGM batteries, and you can probably charge an AGM battery at an amp rate that's about 50% of its rated capacity. So a 100 amp hour battery, you can probably charge it up at 50 amps, which would only take about 1, maybe 1.5 hours to replace that 50 amp hours of power that you used. And finally, if you had a lot of extra money and you put lithium batteries in your van or RV, well, lithium batteries can accept very, very high charge rates. And usually it's at least 100 amps, so that unless you have a really oversized alternator, you are probably going to be able to take the full output capacity that's available from your alternator to charge the batteries. And if you only drew them down by 50 amp hours, you might be able to recharge those batteries in 45 minutes.
Now that I've talked a little bit about what the system includes and what it does, let's look at the actual wiring diagram, and I'll talk a little bit about specific components. This diagram shows just how easy it is to wire an automatic charging relay. If we start on the left-hand side, you can see I've got the starting battery. From the positive lead on the starting battery, we run a wire directly to the automatic charging relay. We then go from there to a fuse or circuit breaker, and then from the fuse or circuit breaker to the positive lead on a house battery. And this is going to be a heavy gauge wire that is sized to take the full output of the alternator. Then we have another heavy gauge wire that goes from the negative lead on the house battery to the negative connection on the starting battery. And finally, we have a light gauge wire It could be as small as, say, number 14 or number 16 that goes from the negative of the starting battery to the negative terminal on the automatic charging relay. And that's it. It's very simple. The hardest part is going to be routing the wires. So let's consider what sort of components we might want to use for a vehicle with a 95 amp alternator, which is going to include most Chevy and GMC vans that have the stock alternator. You're going to want an automatic charging relay. Given the options, probably you're going to have to go with a 120 amp capacity automatic charging relay. You're going to want a fuse or circuit breaker. Because we're looking at a 95 amp alternator, that's going to be our maximum possible current, so we'll go with a 100 amp fuse. What about the heavy gauge wire? Well, it has to be rated to carry at least 95 amperes, which is the output of our alternator. So for 95 amps, the size of the wire is going to depend on the distance from the starting battery to the house battery. If the distance is small, say 0 to 9 feet, you can use number 4 wire. If it's 9 to 14 feet, you're going to have to go up to number 2. 14 to 18 feet, you're going to have to go to number 1. And 18 to 22 feet, which is about as long as we're likely to have in a van or small Class C, we have to go to number 0 wire. If it's longer than 22 feet, you're going to have to go to double aught or heavier wire. So that's basically all you need. The only additional thing is some connectors on the wires to match up with the connectors on the batteries and the other components. Now I'd like to just give a few examples of possible components for my system with a 95 amp alternator. As I said, we're going to want probably a 120 amp capacity automatic charging relay. Here are two options. A Cyrix 120 amp ACR, which sells for about $51 on Amazon. This is my choice. A Blue Sea 120 amp ACR, a little more expensive, $82.50 or so. We're going to want either a 100 amp circuit breaker or fuse. I prefer circuit breakers because all you have to do is reset them. You don't have to replace anything. A good option is a Bussmann CB185-100 100 amp circuit breaker. Easy to reset. Surface mounting, $27 on Amazon. Or you could buy an ANL fuse holder with a 100 amp fuse, which is going to cost you around $14 on Amazon. Now, what about wiring? Well, the cost of that is going to depend on two things. One, how big does the wire have to be? In other words, how long is it? And the quality of wire you want to use. Just arbitrarily, I've chosen a system that's going to require 20 feet of wire. In other words, the starting battery is within 10 feet wire length of the house battery, which is certainly possible on any van. The two options for wire are marine grade, which for 20-foot length is going to cost you around $65. This would be my choice. The reason is simple. Marine grade wire is tinned, it's coated with solder. All the strands are individually coated. It is much more corrosion resistant and will last basically forever in an automotive application. Or you can go with automotive grade wire for, instead of 65 for the marine grade, around 40 for automotive grade. You're also going to want some connectors attached to the wire. You could buy your own crimper, but that's going to cost you anywhere from $40 to $60, and do them yourself. Plus you'd also have to buy the connectors, which cost about $1.50 to $2 each. Or you could order your wire as individual lengths of wire with the connectors crimped on. When I looked this up online, the total cost to do that for all the connectors you'd need came to $26. So that's probably a good investment. You get professionally crimped connections that way. So what are the total costs? Well, if you go low end with the components I've listed here, with the cheaper ACR, automotive grade wire and a fuse, you're looking at about $130. If you go high end, which is the more expensive ACR I've listed here, which I don't really see any advantage to, marine grade wire and a circuit breaker, you're about $200. And if you go with the compromise, which are the components that I would choose, which is the cheaper ACR, marine grade wire and a circuit breaker, you're about $170. So compared to a solar system, this setup is going to cost you a bit less than a single 100-watt panel with a PWM charge controller. So it's definitely worth considering if you don't use your vehicle for long periods of time between charging.
Now I'm over at the Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse looking across Blue Hill Bay towards Swans Island. And here's the sign for the Bass Harbor Head Light. And I wanted to say two more things. First off, if you decide to charge your batteries from your engine's alternator, that charging is not free. It is going to use a little bit of fuel, and it's probably going to result in slightly lower gas mileage. In the worst case, it's going to drop your gas mileage by about 2%. So if your gas mileage is 10 miles per gallon, it's going to drop you by about 0.2 miles per gallon. That's not going to be a big effect, but over the long term, it will cost you a little bit of money because, after all, energy isn't free. The other thing about using an automatic charging relay is once you install it, that's it. You don't have to think about it. It's automatic. It does everything for you. It connects the two batteries when you're charging and disconnects them when you're not charging. You don't have to think about it, and it's basically an install and forget system. Okay, now I'd like to wrap this video up. I've moved slightly and we're looking through the woods at the top of the Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse. So, basically, if you liked this video, give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate a subscription to my channel. That'll give you notice of when the next video in this series is coming out. And if you have any questions, please comment and I will answer your questions. So, thanks a lot for watching.